Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Heidinger. Thanks for joining the community call. If it's your first time, welcome. And if you come every month, we're very excited to have you back. This call will be kind of cool. It's a little bit of a continuation of last month. So I'll do a couple of quick updates. And then we've actually kind of miraculously thrown together a demo and are really making some pretty good progress on a pretty big evolution to adaptive cards in a couple different facets. So we're calling it adaptive components. So we're going to do a demo and a walkthrough of what that is. You'll be able to play with it yourself as well and help kind of give us feedback and drive where this goes. So that'll be the meat of what we talk about today. So I just want to call out a couple important links. We will have a whole bunch of links, especially if you're new. There is a lot to absorb with adaptive cards, but the biggest one, the one that I want to make sure people see every month, is our roadmap. And that includes things we've committed to doing, things we've recently released, as well as a good look at what's kind of in our backlog that has a high likelihood of being implemented. So it's divided into three different sections. There's under consideration, there's planned, and then there's released. So that's going to be your main link at aka.ms/AC roadmap. Just kind of keep a look at that. And it's also our main portal for receiving user feedback. If you don't have a developer account at GitHub or you want to submit more anonymous feedback, you can basically upvote ideas or backlog items, tell us why you like it, and you don't need to create an account or anything, and it'll kind of privately send to us. And that's the data that we use to really prioritize what we're going to work on and build next. So keep an eye on that, pin it if you like, and it's really your best opportunity to control the direction. I want to call another thing. So we had an Ignite session by some different folks, some folks on Teams. It was called Elevate User Experiences with Adaptive Cards and Teams. I don't have a short link, so check out that session. It's pretty great, and it really dives into some team stuff in particular. The last thing is we're doing a Power Platform focus group next week. So next Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. I know it's a little early for some of us, but we wanted to accommodate multiple time zones. We are looking for a couple extra people. So if you're interested in that, if you're a Power user using adaptive cards, we're going to focus pretty heavily on Power Automate, but we would still like to hear about the experiences people have, some of the needs people have, some of the workflows people are doing with the Power Platform and adaptive cards. So if you'd be interested in joining about that, I can give you more details. Just email matt.heidinger@microsoft.com, and it will be about an hour, about 45 minutes of, things like that. So that'll be next month. And we're trying out these focus group things, I'll just be honest. So we did one last month that was pretty good. Learned a lot about how to do virtual focus groups. So we're certainly on a learning journey on these things. We're going to try and scope them a little bit to our different customer segments. So this one's specifically a Power Platform. We'll likely be doing a different one with some of our more traditional devs and trying to understand the needs and motivations of our different cohorts, if you will. So, okay, what's next? Next is the big thing. So adaptive components. So a whole bunch of links are here, but this GitHub issue is your start of it. And I want to summarize just kind of the two big motivations behind adaptive components. One of the things, and I'll be honest, this has been a recurrent message coming from the focus groups we've done, meeting people at Ignite, talking to some of our more vocal members like Tim, and sometimes Tomash as well. We've heard people that sometimes have a hard time getting started. Like, how do I just get started building cards? How can we more promote reuse, discovery? Some of you who've been a long time follower of this call, we've tried to build this thing called the template service to help with that. But really, it's just about, you just want to build a card. You want to build a great looking card. And you don't necessarily want to build it from scratch. Maybe someone else already has a really great way to put a file in a card, or a restaurant lookup, or like even a website URL. So that's the concept behind components. And it's a whole bunch of really cool things working together, which is why at last month, all we really did was kind of a spec review. And that's a little boring, but we were at least just trying to get feedback from the community. This time we've actually been able to prototype it a little bit. And like I said, you will be able to play with it yourself. So diving in, what the heck do we mean by component? Here is what we reviewed last month, and I'll give a quick example. So in this card, there are things, if you're familiar with adaptive cards, we have UI primitives, the ones every UI framework has, like text blocks and images and columns and things like that. And there's also other things in here. So if you look at this card, and I do apologize, I know it's a little blurry, so hopefully it's at least legible. But we'll see the demo, so this will make a little more sense. But this was the inspiration behind components. So you've got a text block, you've got a text block that's wrapping, and then you've got what they were calling this file chiclet. Just a little preview of a file. It's got the icon, it's got the file name and a URL, some actions. And that's a thing. That's the thing we're calling a component. It's a file. It's a way of previewing a file. You'll see more examples of these things. But that's the general concept. And also in this card is another component. And it's called the user component, or sometimes persona. And so in a user, what we're typically seeing is the person's photograph or profile picture along with their name. And you usually get some kind of mouse over behavior, right? Like if I mouse over this person, I would usually get the live persona card that you're familiar with in Outlook and Teams and stuff like that. So what a lot of this is how can we allow people to create these components that are really just, they're, to use like a physics or a chemistry analogy, our text blocks and things are all like our atoms, and our components are more like molecules. They're just this higher order concept that puts the atoms together in a certain way and says, hey, here's this. If you have a file or you have a person, you can use this. Another example, and I'll skip some of the definition because we'll just jump right into it. But another example is a thing. This is like, I just have this data. There's things all over the place. If you're familiar with schema.org, which is a huge effort. I'll show you what a thing looks like. Whenever you either Google or Bing something, you get all those cards that surround your results. Those are all built by this semantic metadata that is usually backed by schema.org. So it's everything. It's like, this is a thing or whatever. And a thing usually has a name, a description, and an image. So that's a way of getting a thing. And now, again, a thing is just anything. It's something that's got a name, and description, and image. The next thing we wanted to add, and that we'll demo too, is that for a given component, there's very likely going to be multiple views or layouts. So for example, if I'm looking at a thing, I may want this, what's known as, a hero view, where I've got the image on top and then the name and then the description, or maybe a thumbnail view where the image is on the left and then the name and description are on the right, or a stack view where the image becomes the background image, but the name and description is the same. So for a component, the data that you're sending, name, description, image, for a file, it's the file name, file URL. The data is always the same. It's what it turns into that's a little different. And so we wanted to support that. And lastly, these things are purely declarative files, which we'll get into, which enables a really cool way of promoting reuse and discovery. So hopefully with that backstory, I can say this is what we went through last month. What we've ended up been able to build, and this is a little bit, this will be a little buggy, and it'll also be a little bit slow at times because it's on our very free Azure function tier, but it seems warm, and so so bear with me a little bit if this goes. We literally just got this together last night. Here's the designer. Again, you can play with this. I will admit it's a little bit, you'll some slowness with the service and whatnot. This is very much pre-alpha. This is like, you're getting a live demo and we'll slowly iterate on it. So expect us to work through this over the next little bit, but we wanted to get something for you for today. Okay, so what I've done, I've pulled up the designer, I've clicked new card, and we're now at an empty card. And here's the new thing, right? So we've always seen, I can drag in a text block and say, double click, hello, community call. Wow, it is so hard to type with this microphone floating in front of me. And then I'm going to drag in a component. This is the new thing. So I'm going to drag in a component right here, just like I would drag in anything else. And it's saying the component name is missing. And so what we can do, David on our team built this pretty cool component picker, And what this is doing is hitting our service, which we will go into. But there is a service that basically shows all of the available components. And they're grouped by a namespace and a name. And so I'll start out by just doing a very basic like stock quote one. So iextrading.com is a very popular financial API. People use it all the time to basically get stock data, all sorts of data. So what this is an iextrading.com/stock quote. So I'm going to click on this one and show you what happens in the card. Obviously now I've got a stock quote in here, but the cool thing and how this is very different than what we had with the template service is this fits naturally with my other card elements. I can drag in another text block here and say, you know, look up there with these cool carrots, look up there for a stock quote, you know, whatever. So I can compose these things much more flexibly than I used to be able to. But so what the heck is this component? So first, we've done some really cool work on the property sheet so that when you click on things, so for those of you who are like really brand new to this, let me just quickly say, so when I have a text block, well, like most designers, we have the property sheet that tells you what you can do with, you know, a text block. So if I want to change the size to large. And so we wanted to follow the same thing with a component. The thing about a component is its data is dynamic. So when I click on this component, which name, so the component name is iextrading.com/stock quote. This is a stock quote component, and there may be different stock quote components. So like maybe NASDAQ has an API. I don't know if they do, but if they do, and they want to have their own way of viewing a stock quote, it would be something like NASDAQ.com/stock quote. So everyone can start to contribute and build these components that they can share in a GitHub repo and a service that we can basically learn. So hopefully that's following along. And again, I'll try and connect these dots as we go. But I wanted to kind of get through the end-to-end and also, by the way, open it up to questions as people have. That said, if people have completely clarifying questions, please do raise your hand because I want people to be able to follow along with this. If you have questions on like, oh, why'd you do it that way? Or how are these things happening? I absolutely want to take those questions, but we'll do that at the end. But if you're just kind of lost, don't feel bad, raise your hand. It's totally cool. And we'll make sure you're following along. So what's happening, and I can show you in the JSON just as well. So the JSON actually might be an easier way to look at this for now. So what I've dragged on under my text block that says hello community call is a component. And that component has some properties, and that's basically the data. So as I say MSFT, that happens to be this. If you know what's our fans over, let's do like Apple or something. So AAPL, which is it Apple Corporation? I don't know what their full thing is. Oh, maybe it doesn't actually update in the JSON. I have to change it in the property sheet. Oh yeah, okay, there it's working there. So now you're seeing some of the cracks in our early demo, but you totally hopefully get it. So what's happening here is I'm changing just the properties. I'm changing just the data. What symbol is this? What's the company name? What's the change value? Have no idea what their stock is doing right now. What's the change percent? When was the last update? This is in Unix epoch format. That's again how that's one particular how IEX trading has their data. And I can, change like the price and things. I can change the open price. I can basically just massage the data and the UI just gets updated. If I change this change value to 6.3, so it's up $6, watch when I change this to negative. So as I change it to negative 6.3, the entire component updates its UI to show it just changed, to a red color and the arrow went down. But all I had to do as a card author to put a stock quote in is drag in this component. I can choose the stock quote one, and I just have to update the data. And you can see in the JSON here, most likely, if you're hitting that API, this is the data that API sends you. So basically, if you happen to be a customer of IEX Trading or something, you hit their API, you drop in the component, you fill in the data as received from their API, and just put in this name. And literally with those three pieces, you get this full UI, completely minimal work. Basically, you would drag in a component, type in the name of the component you want a stock quote, and then fill in the data. And you get this really nice automatic representation of say, a stock quote. So there's some really cool things happening here. I will, because we've got some time, I'm going to dig a little bit into the implementation side. But let me know if that didn't make sense. I'm going to show one other example, possibly a little more simple one. But let's say I'm going to have a new kind of blank card here. I'm going to drag in a component. And this time, I just want that thing component. And so a thing, again, is anything. A thing just has a name, a description, and an image. And so instead of adaptive cards, maybe it's Matt Heidinger, who is also a thing, and he is a person. And I have a photo somewhere that I would be able to get, but hopefully you get it. Now, here's what we talked about again. With a thing, that data type, name, description, and image, we want multiple views of the same thing. So we have this view dropdown, and every component gets to decide what views it supports. So a thing happens to have multiple. It has this thumbnail view, or it has this stack view, which could probably be improved a little bit. But hopefully you kind of get there's different ways of interpreting that same data. So I just say I want a thumbnail view. Now, what's really cool about this, let's just maybe, I haven't tried this, but let's see if we can copy and paste this. Okay, cool. So now I've got 3 people. I've got 3 components. Let's say we've got Matt, we've got David, and we've got Shalini. And, yeah, so it's not updating from the JSON. So you'll have to bear with me from that. That will work, obviously. Oh, okay. We've got a couple of bugs. It's updating all of them. So you're seeing kind of the pre-alpha state. But hopefully you can sort of get what this would do. It makes it very easy. And maybe you want the top one, you're in your card, you want the top one to be kind of the hero view, or you want like 3 of these stack views. Again, it's showing a little bit of the composability of these things where you're not explicitly laying out all these things. You're not having to do, here's a column set, here's my thing. It's just very, very short and concise by saying, I just want these 3 components. They happen to be things. I want the view of thumbnail, and just here's the data that backs them. So that was the thing. I'll do one other quick demo and then show how the heck this thing was put together and how you build components. And if I can think about it, I'll tee up some suggestions from the audience maybe. I wanted to kind of build one and show you how easy it is. We can build one and then publish a component to a repository. So I saw a question in there, is the plan to have a registry there? And that is the plan. We will offer a centralized repository, but we will also make sure this works in a decentralized way. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a little bit. So let's drag in one final component. I'm going to choose, and again, you'll imagine this, by the way, the evolution of this pick a component thing is, this is showing the whole list. Let me see if that's, the service is still out. Sometimes I just have to reboot it. So if you get this and you're testing it right now, sometimes it's because the service is slow because it's on a free alpha tier, but sometimes you just need to refresh the page if you happen to be hitting that. So I'll go to new card and drag in the component. And so the final thing we'll do on this page is you'll be able to have a box in here and you'll be able to search, right? So like, if you're just getting started with adaptive cards and you're like, do you guys support files? Do you support music tracks? Do you have calendar items? You'll be able to type that or like a GitHub issue. You'll kind of see, and the hope is over time, if we do our jobs right and make this really friction-free, that we'll get a lot of people contributing to this. So we're hoping that you'll see components from all sorts of places. Like we pre-populated this where there's github.com issues, there's graph files, graph users, IEX stocks quotes, schema.org has things, and also a local business I'll show. And again, with the local business component, it just does this. So it pulls in a component, it pre-populates the data. This happens to be, a business, but this is showing some pretty cool stuff too. Like there's a star rating. So depending on, what the rating, oh yeah, I can't edit the JSON. I keep forgetting. So with that small bug, but this, I think, makes it so much easier to just get started. You've already got this data. Maybe it's your own data. Certainly what I'm showing here is public internet-facing data, but we absolutely want to make it work that if you're a business and you're an organization, you'll have your own components most likely. Maybe you're a group that is in a microservices architecture and you've got a whole bunch of different teams. Well, this gets us a lot closer to a world where API owners, the people who send that data, can also say, and here's a really great component for our data. Like someone somewhere owns this data shape, right? This is how a local business is. It's got an address, it's got a review. Since they're most familiar with the data, maybe, if they're a small company, maybe they don't have designers and things, maybe they're like, and here's the best way to represent our data. So you will very likely have your own internal component repository that isn't necessarily for public consumption. It's just for your business and your needs. So we want to support that, and I'll sort of explain how you would even maybe get around that today using what we have. So cool. That's a look. I see a bunch of questions coming in. Dana, can you let me know, or someone let me know if they're just questions on why are you doing things? Totally cool. If people just aren't getting it.
There's a couple. One asked if the adaptive card itself will become a component.
Let me hold that question and ask a little bit. That's a good question, and I think so, yes. But let's save that for some of the more discussion. I'm loving, by the way. Thanks for the chat stream kind of filling up with stuff. That's cool. I appreciate the enthusiasm with some of this. So the final thing, and then I will just kind of take it to Q&A, is how did this whole thing work? Let me do a quick, what could I do I was trying to think what could we build a really quick thing? And actually maybe that's what I'll do real quick. We'll build one, we'll publish it, and it should take less than a couple minutes. And then while that's building, we'll take a couple questions. So let's say right now I've got my component for schema.org. I've got things. Let's just do a music song, a music recording. So here's what it looks like. We've got a separate GitHub repo in the branch called components. And again, I'll share these links, so don't worry if you're not following along. But we've got a folder of all the components in a GitHub repo, and they're grouped by the domain. So these are all the components you saw. So when I go to schema.org, here's the thing, and here's the local business. That was the Molten Bind one. So if I click on thing, here's what a component looks like. It has a name. It's an adaptive component. It has a name. We provide some sample data, which makes it easy. That's what when you drag the component onto the designer, it populates with that sample data. That's why you get a thing out of the box. So by the way, I do want to explicitly mention one thing. There is a service involved here. So when I'm clicking choose here and this component list is loading, it is hitting a service. So the designer itself doesn't have any components baked in. If I just want to make that clear. When we build and publish one, it will be available. We'll click on choose and we'll see music right there, without doing anything. So it's very much a world of the client just is learning and getting better without any updates. And so that's what I'm showing here in this GitHub. This is the service where all the component definitions live. So just to make that clear, it's not embedded into the designer. So it has some sample data. It also has a schema, and this is where you define what are the properties that the purely data properties that this component needs. So it has a name, it has a description, and it has an image. And this is what we use to build up the properties sheet. So I'll refresh it real quick and show you what a thing looks like. So if I drag back on a thing, because some of them don't have all this figured out. So now I click on that and you'll see here name, description, and image. So this property sheet is being automatically populated, dynamically populated by the schema of this component. And that's where you can say it's a string. I can't remember what level of support we got, but you can say if it's a Boolean. So maybe your data, we certainly supported numbers. So if you look at the stock one, you could see that it's numbers. So you basically describe what's the shape of your data, and then you describe the views. And in thing, every component will have a default view. So here's the default view. And this is where you see it builds up. This is where I don't know if I lost you. I literally made up that metaphor on the dot or on the spot, but the molecule to atoms metaphor. This is the molecule, and then the view basically takes all those components. It takes our adaptive card elements, our primitives, and binds them to the incoming properties. So the default view has a container, and at the first thing is an image, and then a text block, and then the description. And it's using our templating binding language to build that stuff up. In the thumbnail view for a thing, it creates a column set, and in the first column goes the image, and then the second column goes the name and the description. And then in that stack view, which I showed, and I can again show you that so that we can go to view thumbnail. You can see it's in a column now. And then if I go to stack, it actually makes the image background. And obviously it's a really poor image to choose for this, but if it was a prettier image, it would look decent. And all that's doing is taking the container and it's setting the background image property to the image. So it's just changing what ultimately adaptive card elements get created from that same data. And if we ever want to add a new view to this, which I guess is something we could do as a quick demo. Let's just take stack here. So this is my VS Code version of that same repo. So I could edit it right here just to show you, but I've cloned this repo here. And so we're going to make another view. It's going to be called demo. And all we're going to do is add in a simple text block that says, don't use this. This is how creative I'm feeling right now. Don't use this view. It's just for funsies. Perfect. Okay, so now all we did, we had a new view called demo. It's going to do the same thing as the other one, and it basically just added a new element in here. And I just formatted it real quick, but it's basically just adding a text block to the top with some hard-coded text. Don't use this view, it's just for funsies. And I could, bind to different properties. I can do all sorts of stuff in here if I wanted to make this more real. But that'll be one example. And actually what I'll do real quick is I'll just commit this, made a demo change, commit this to our repo, and I'll push it, and that'll take like a minute or so to build. And so I'll keep talking while that's happening. But what we expect to happen once that builds and the service shows up is we'll refresh our designer, click on the view, and we'll see a new item in the view called demo. And that is a pretty cool example of the client just learning new behavior out of the gate. So maybe that'll be as simple as our demo goes, and we can take some questions. But if we want to, and if we have time, I can show you how easy it is to just add a whole new one. So all we do, we go, let's say, we've got a GitHub issue, whatever. You basically just create a new component in here and follow the same steps. You say, okay, what's this component's name? What is its sample data? What is its schema, and what are its views? And that's it. You follow that same formula, and that's all we need to discover components dynamically as new one gets added, discover what properties they support so a user can automatically fill them in, and then discover what views ultimately get rendered. And what's so cool about this is you can see we can just drag it around. It's just part of our everyday adaptive card. So like you can really build out these really neat things. In fact, if I can build, if the new one's working, I could show you that file one. What we could have done is created that file one from the original. I mean, this was our original inspiration for this thing. I'm looking at this card and I'm seeing, okay, text block, file. I mean, we could totally recreate that in a very easy way. And I won't do it all right now, but proposal requested really, really quickly. And it's like, what did it say? Something like FY 2020, something. And then they drag in the file component. And this is where I would choose my component. And I would say, I want a graph.microsoft.com/file. Looks like it's loading, might be trying to load. We'll see if it loads up. But yeah, and then you can really just recreate this exact look. You got this text block file, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, tons of stuff I just went through. Let me wind back. If people want to raise their hands, though, it looks like there is one hand up. I can start going through that list. Looks like Mark, do you want to unmute and kick us off?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I've been putting some comments on the side, and I see a few people have done the thumbs up on it. So one of the things I was asking about is if the components could use templated data, and Tomas confirmed that it can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, you can do binding right in there. Yes, it will work.
And then just one other thing I just kind of popped in there. I said it'd be cool to have a component that it serves as a data input for the data for the components themselves. So if you're pointing off to a schema.org restaurant, let's say, and you need all the data to be filled in by somebody, it would be great to say, render a card that will accept the input for all those data values for that schema. Render it so I can just accept that data and I'll suck it into my database for creating the JSON for that card when I want to present it again.
Yeah,
so,
that's cool to hear you would like that. That is definitely on the roadmap. A couple months ago, we did demo on the template service. We could build an editable card, so with text block based on a JSON schema. So you give us the schema, and we'll basically render kind of the similar thing to the property sheet, only it's in the card. And it makes it so, if you don't want to display the thing, you basically want to fulfill the data. And I think saying you want a set of inputs representing that schema in the card itself.
Exactly, just to make it convenient, because the thing that we're using cards for would totally be helpful to allow a third party to input all the data for us. We just present the card saying, fill out all these properties. And which actually brings me to one other suggestion. If you're using a templated solution, if your source template says, I'm expecting data to be in the data JSON, but the data is not there, it would be rather nice to have a way to, in the template JSON, to have a property that says, if this portion of the data JSON isn't provided, it's missing for some reason, don't render this section. In other words, I don't have everything in my data to compose everything that's probably should be shown in that subsection.
So I think
some kind of.
Have you seen our DollarWin concept at all?
Yeah. I was actually considering if that's maybe an option to provide that kind of ability.
It is at a kind of broad strokes, like you want to drop this entire object. If you need a little more fine grained, we do have kind of null checks you can do in the templating. So, if you could do something like if title is, I can't remember, like just blank or something, or no, I can't remember what exactly. You can do a little more stuff like that, but that's a little more heavy handed. So if you have a scenario that you think even both of those answers are a little kind of clumsy, be happy to hear about that and see if there's improvements we can make.
Okay. I don't want to hog all the time, but I'd actually bring it to your attention here. In order to provide this kind of functionality, I use the HTML renderer quite a bit, and the documentation indicates that we are to provide all the event handling for everything that happens in that renderer. The problem is that when HTML is rendered for each element, there is no IDs set on any of the element objects. The buttons, they have no ID on them, so I can't, conveniently set an event listener to that button, and it really hampers me. So I did provide a suggestion of providing as a base object for every item in the schema to put a tag option.
Okay.
I think you may have read my suggestion. I don't know if you did, but anyways.
I'm not. Yeah, but certainly bring it back to the top of our inbox.
I will.
Either email me or post the GitHub issue.
I sure will.
This has come up a lot, and it probably just fell by the wayside. So sorry about that.
No worries. That's all I have. But thanks for taking my
awesome
my hand raise.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
I see another question. Jeff.
Yes, just had a quick question. So we currently implement some adaptive cards into Teams, and I'm just wondering, Teams kind of has a constraint on the size of the cards, and I'm wondering if there's a way to tell within the designer if this is going to be something that's supported within the Teams, because I think there's like a 28 KB limit for the size, and as you add more components to it, obviously the size is going to increase. And wondering if there's a way to notify the engineer when they're designing it that this could possibly go over the size limit.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I don't see anyone from Teams on our call today, but I'm pretty sure in Q4, the quarter we're currently in, calendar Q4, they are removing that size limit. Significantly bigger, like tenfold plus. And so hopefully that gets around it. That's the last I heard was Q4. I can check on that. I think there actually is an issue in our GitHub. If you just search for team size limit, you might be able to follow it and you can watch it, because that's the one I've asked the Teams folks to comment on once they address it, so that you can at least kind of be apprised of that. That said, if we can't address it, I will note down that we should we can make design time improvements to make it so you catch some of these things earlier.
Awesome.
Yeah, to add to that, I just got in touch with the Teams PM for that, and it is coming soon, and they'll share more as it moves into preview. So
Cool.
Just look for more information on that coming soon is all I can say now.
Great. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Dana.
Are you folks talking about the full width issue, or is it something else that you're talking about in Teams? The card itself doesn't get full width. Like for example,
so it's not so much about the width, it's more about the actual content itself. If there's too much content, it gives you a warning message.
That said, we are fixing both of those things. So the width, the getting more width will be rolling out shortly. They actually covered it at the Ignite talk. Okay. I think they may have cut it from the content just to keep the content smaller, but it's still in their backlog. So the cards will get additional width in Teams soon.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so tons of chat. If anyone else wants to raise their hand, please feel free. Otherwise, I will scroll back and let's actually just see real quick. I don't know if anyone else has a better handle on which questions we could. Dana, I don't know if you got a handle on them.
There was a lot, and maybe Tomas has been answering some of it around around storage and CDN and the best options around that. So for scenarios, Tomas had said to send adaptive card using Power Automate. The CDN is transparent to the user. And if that's not an option, someone else talked about a workaround using the Graph API. A couple comments around SharePoint. So if there was anyone who had a specific question around the storage and your scenario, we're happy to have you unmute and ask.
Yeah, and just to add some color commentary there. So right now, we're backing these things in a GitHub repo, and think that makes sense for public components, schema.org, Microsoft Graph, etc., like that are meant for this general consumption. For those of you that want to store, certainly you're using maybe CDS. I can't remember if it got renamed to something. I think it got kind of like a cool name with a fancy word in it. But if you plan on storing these components in other ways, I'd love to hear from that. Like tenant storage. It's not an area I'm an expert in, by the way. So it's very much I want to kind of ground it in, what would you use today if a GitHub repo wouldn't work? And by the way, you would totally be able to fork this repo and have a private repo. The renderer API, the other side of this coin, is you will be able to configure your component registries live. So the default one will be baked in, and right now it's looking like it'll be something like I think api.adaptivecards.io/components. That's what we're thinking will be the default one. But you will be able to remove that default if you don't want the default, and you will be able to add in your own, including multiple registries. So it's kind of like a first match wins. So maybe you've got a handful of them locally that you want to find first, but you also don't mind supporting the public ones. So you can kind of enter what your preference is and what order those components get resolved. And the quick thing I'll say, so I dragged in, let's see if I just restart it. Let's just see real quick. Yeah, I'll refresh this, drag in. Let's see if our view, our weird view we made for the thing is going to be here. So we went to, again, I'm picking a component. I happen to be picking thing. I click on it, and the view, we've got a new one called demo. And if I click on it, it just says, don't use this. It's just for funsies. So we just completely, like, someone somewhere can have opened a PR, added a new view to this thing, and the thing component just got better. I was able to just now use a whole new view. Again, I'm the same person doing both, but hopefully you can imagine a world where, you're not necessarily the component author. Someone else is defining what a thing looks like and making sure it looks great and providing reviews. All you have to do is say, here, I've got a component, it's a thing, and I want the demo one or whatever. So pretty neat process, I think, for really getting to this distributed contribution and really empowering a ton of people to create these things. And one final thing I'll say on that too, right now, obviously you have to just edit this JSON by hand. I'm the one who built all these components, and it's a bit of a pain, to just do it in JSON and visualize what they look like. So we do plan on thinking through and building components in the tool a first-class thing. So if you don't want to just edit JSON by hand and you want to be able to author components, we will think through what's the best way to build a component in the tooling as well, and just kind of view those different things.
Hilton had his hand raised.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Hilton, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Matt. So first of all, thanks for this. It looks great. I think friends don't let friends design cards in raw JSON, so it'd be great to have that designer coming. I just wanted to touch on the card hosting or internal repos. I think if the organization has the capability to let's say have somebody set up a GitHub repo or something like that, obviously that would be perfect scenario. But I happen to have this with putting images into adaptive cards recently. I had users who were building some cards themselves. And we're struggling to kind of work out where to put their files, just raw sort of JPEGs and so on. And it touches on this as well. The same might be the case where maybe a smaller organization, or you're just not sure who to contact. You're kind of more in the power user scenario, and you really just want to host either these cards or images or anything that you want to use in a card somewhere. SharePoint, obviously, as much as we have other options, we're kind of all within the M365 family. It would be great to have the ability to use SharePoint for something like that. So, the CDN is almost a second prize because there's additional setup for that. But, at least that's a one-off. But I realize, this is kind of jumping into Teams and then jumping into SharePoint and, things beyond your personal control. But just maybe to sort of explain that scenario, it'd be great if there was, SharePoint as a super simple document storage mechanism. Users could just kind of drag the content they want and be able to use them in the cards directly.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective and totally think there's opportunities for us to solve that. Even hosting aside, we do have a current limitation in this image URL. Well, for right now, it has to be kind of a publicly authenticatable URL. So a lot of people in Power Platform today, if they have a SharePoint image, they're running it through a conversion, encode it, and then you can actually send the base64 encoded payload to an adaptive card, but that's limited to about 2 kilobytes. It works great for things like icons, but high-res images really get scaled down. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to figure out, one, how do we access some of these images that might be behind some authentication? Presumably, if you're in Teams and Teams knows who you are, I know there's ways we can solve it. We need to kind of think holistically on what does that look like to access and tighten some of the M365 integration, I think, when it comes to the storage and the referencing of things.
Yeah, exactly. So that the suggestion to use a public mode SharePoint CDN was just one possible solution. If you're explicitly saying this is public, you're sort of making sure that anything there is something that it deals with the authentication issue at least. The restriction is that SharePoint won't. The SharePoint CDN engine won't allow calls from a non-SharePoint.com referrer.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks, Hilton. I totally appreciate that, and I noted it down. We'll try and get some traction on it. But if you have any follow-up feedback or anything, or just want to get it in mail, like, reach out to me and we'll make sure we have a way to get back a hold of you. Scott, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, so my question was, I couldn't really see on the screen share, is the contents of the component actually injected into the body of the adaptive card? And the reason I'm asking that question is, what thoughts have you guys given to around versioning of components? And like, I could see a situation to where even if the component was injected into the body, if you go into the designer, what's sort of the refresh mechanism? Like, you just did the example with the demo. But let's say I'm going into my adaptive card to make a minor edit with no intention of updating the component. Would components automatically refresh, or is that sort of a manual process? Or that's sort of the question I have around is like the versioning lifecycle management and preventing unintended consequences.
And Matt,
Yeah.
if you don't think I'm going to address this.
Sure.
This is David. So no, the body of a component, like what defines it, the molecules, as Matt called them, are not injected inside the body of the card. It's really only just the component definition that is in there, and everything is dynamic. So that means that at runtime, as the card is rendered, unless there is a local copy that's available, the SDK will pull the latest version of the component on the fly and render that. So right now, obviously, there is no versioning story because this is just a prototype, and there's a lot of stuff that we need to figure out in terms of how we handle versions and that kind of stuff. But
I'll add real quick to that, if you could still. Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to add. We have the GitHub issue that you can follow along on this, because this is definitely baking. But we did kind of brainstorm some things like, okay, you've got a schema.org book, but then maybe you'll have a schema.org book v2 or something. So we totally get versioning as a consideration. We just we're definitely working through it.
But there are really two different versioning stories here. There is one where as an author of a card, you use a specific version of a component explicitly. Mm-hmm. And then there is the other versioning story, which is whenever a particular version of a component gets updated in the backend, in the store, then the card will automatically get that.
And if I may, I have one follow-on comment / question with regard to something you said during this explanation. So you said that the definition of the card is queried or basically pulled every time the adaptive card is rendered. What thoughts or considerations have you been given to performance implications? Because you're having to re-render, re-query that card every time the card's rendered. And depending on the number of components, that could be negative consequences.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to make network calls all the time. So the idea is to cache things as much as possible. And there's probably going to be some sort of a default. Well, there is actually already a default, a built-in cache mechanism in the SDK in that prototype version. But there will be ways to offload the caching to the host if the host can do a better job, or save to disk or that kind of stuff. And there will be ways for the host to recall that cache at startup so that components are readily available. Now, the thing though is that once a component is in the cache, it will obviously not be pulled again from the service. And if there is a new version of that component in the service, the application will simply not take advantage of that. So it's always that same, drawback of using a cache. It improves performance, but it also prevents you from getting the latest and greatest. So host applications will have to implement their own policies for when they refresh the cache and that kind of stuff, but that's the idea.
And these are all definitely called out at the top of the thing on open issues. So certainly we want to make sure scrolling in Teams isn't impacted by any of this stuff. We know if we get to a world where components rely on other components, there's definitely some stuff to kind of figure out. This has kind of gone from, just as a quick timeline, from an idea to a spec like in 29 days. So we definitely still have some stuff to think through before we really bake this in, which is why, anyone, especially Scott, if Scott, anyone interested in helping drive this, like making sure we're considering things, or at least, weighing in, we'd be happy to chat with you as well. But definitely the basics on security and performance will be some of the first things we really start to look at.
I mean, security, I don't believe that there is really any security concern here because, again, this is entirely declarative. The worst that can happen is that a card will look terrible because a component will have a terrible layout. But in terms of security, there's no code that is downloaded. There's no local code injection or anything like that. This is still purely declarative. So not worried personally about that.
Mm-hmm. We're at kind of 2 minutes there. I did put a link to the survey. It definitely helps us out. Dana, thanks for the nudge again on the focus group. We'll reach out to you folks. Thanks for your interest in that. Let us know. It's a really quick survey. It should take like 3-4 minutes. We just like to know how you're enjoying the community calls and the product itself. Got a whole bunch of resources. The AC roadmap one I think is great. We also have a really great community website that a bunch of folks are helping with, madewithcards.io. So check that out. I could totally see components being a major part of that. The Ignite session, there's a whole bunch of other Microsoft 365 developer community calls. And we did Q&A. And so the last thing I'll kind of close with is the next call is November 12th. Second Thursday of every month. So the next one will be November 12th at 9 a.m. And thank you so much for joining. We'll get the video up at ak.ms/m365dev YouTube. And I think Mark has another question, so I'll take that. But I did just want to kind of wrap up with that. We'll get the call up, hopefully not too long, and get a blog post written. That's always the part I take the longest on. And hopefully we'll see you again in November. Thanks a ton, everyone, for your participation today.